Hi, so I'm Josh Constein. I'm a writer for TechCrunch, and today we're going to figure out how to make wearable computing cool, sexy, profitable, and popular. So my first question is actually not to the panelists, but to you guys. Do you think that wearable computing, as it's worn today, is sexy? Is it? All right, how about this? Raise your hands if you think it's really sexy right now. Raise your hands if you think it's kind of sexy. We got a few hands. Who out there thinks it's not sexy yet? Most hands. OK, so this is a huge problem. Essentially, if we don't figure out how to make these devices sexy, we're never going to make them popular, and they're never going to be profitable. But there's this huge issue that comes around with that, and we're going to get into why they're not sexy right now. And there's actually a factual reasons for it. But first I want to see, what do you guys think about the sort of state of sexiness and coolness of wearable computing right now?
So I think we're in the very early phases of what it means to have something either on your wrist or on your face, and why you want to have that every day. You know, smartphones were immediately sexy, partially because Steve Jobs got up there and gave this amazing demo, but I think a real reason was everybody had been carrying phones in their pocket for 7, 8, 10 years already, and they were waiting to be able to access the internet. Email had been like the best innovation so far, and the BlackBerry was pretty good at that. But like once it was like, oh, I can just get the entire web, it was really sexy. Immediately, Apple comes out with a great product that sort of says, look, it's all about getting the web. Forget it, if phone doesn't even work that well, nothing else does. I think we're just waiting for that moment on wearables. It's not clear why having something on my wrist gives me access that I didn't quite have, or on your face. But we know it's coming, and I see a bunch of you with glass out there. And like the fact that like you can just take a picture all the time is actually close to that amazing thing. It just hasn't all come together in a package.
I think sexy is defined in different ways. And for women who make purchase decisions and are shoppers, sexy is what you see on TV and in magazines. And Google Glass actually had a great feature in, I think it was Vogue, in their fashion issue, which is that sort of trend setting and that gets it out there. But aside from that, I haven't really seen the adoption there yet. And my experience has been more, the guy on the subway who's sort of looking in my direction, and I'm not sure if I'm being taped by the glasses on his face, and that's not really that sexy to me. So I don't think it's quite there yet, but I do think as media adopts it more, I think we'll see it go that direction.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think they're a bit too noticeable right now, so size matters, I guess. So as technology moves forward.
But in the opposite of the way we normally think of it.
I guess so, yeah. Or maybe it doesn't matter, I don't know. But it's the first version of Google Glass, right? It's a bit clunky, we get that, but eventually it'll be maybe a little lens you have in your eye, and that's pretty cool. So it shouldn't have to define how you look like if you don't want it to define you, right? So
I think a lot of people are wondering why did the iPhone come out and it was sort of immediately cool, and why has wearable computing come out, and especially with Google Glass and the popularity of it, why has it not achieved that level of cool, and why is it still thought of as kind of geeky? And there's actually a real reason behind that, and that's because the only way that I believe wearable computing and devices like Google Glass are going to get popular is by having killer apps. To have killer apps, you have to have developers. Developers aren't always the sexiest people. And right now, Google's focus right now is just getting the device out to as many great developers as possible so they can get those apps built. But maybe in Silicon Valley, cool people, really hardcore developers, a wide range of people that have Google Glass. But think if you live in Iowa. Imagine that there's only one person in your whole city that has it, and they're like a pretty hardcore back-end hardware hacker. And they're probably not giving off the image that Google Glass is going to need to be able to go mainstream, or that wearable computing is going to need to go mainstream. But it doesn't mean it's not necessary. But I think the question is, how can these companies achieve a balance of cool with getting those apps built so that when it does launch to the public, there's some reason for people to actually use it? So I want to ask, Julie, maybe you can tell us a little bit. So you worked with Groupon very early, and now you're working with Waze. And those are two entirely new product categories. These discounted vouchers, and then traffic information based on other people, and not based on maps or some television news report. You've had experience bringing new products to market. How do you make them cool out the gate?
That's a great question. I think a lot of it is about education, and that's probably the biggest mistake that people make, is that just because you think it's cool doesn't mean that that translates really well. So it's about finding the audience and thinking about how they're going to use your product every day. So with Groupon, it's pretty obvious. It's a shopping mechanism. But what makes it special? What makes it special is what we're giving you access to, which was, that meant that we had to have really important, sexy names straight out of the gate. So we focused in Chicago. We picked, you know, the 5 or 6 businesses that we knew were really beloved locally, and that resonated with people who we then knew would purchase more with us. With Waze, it was a little bit different. It was a different utility. It was helping you get around traffic. And so seeding the voices in the right area, working with the community actually edits our maps every day. And so by going after those people and then making sure that story was told online and in social media, what both of those companies have in common is that we didn't have an advertising budget and we didn't have a PR budget. So all you have left is word of mouth. And so if you create a really simple, easy to understand experience up front, and you seed it with the right people on Facebook and Twitter, and you make sure you're making it easy for them to share those stories and get them into social media, the rest eventually really does sort of take care of itself.
Josh, have you seen any products that you've invested in that really have great success out the bat with some kind of specific strategy for finding influencers or finding people that they thought were going to generate that word of mouth?
You know, it's a great question. I think as we've seen kind of in this era of Twitter and really Twitter popularity, you know, companies like Instagram and Vine in their early days really did spread simply because everybody on Twitter was using them and talking about them. You know, how many times would you have seen an Instagram picture from somebody fairly popular or some celebrity and you're like, man, I wish I could take pictures like that while it was still in a closed beta mode. And then as people started being able to actually download it, you know, it looked like this cool thing that only the cool kids with iPhones had. And so it's sort of, you know, everybody picked that up. I think for software though, it's actually really easy to do that because the transaction cost of actually going to download an app and put it on your phone was very, very light. With these kind of new physical devices and wearables, I think it's going to be very hard just to do this through influencers and word of mouth. I really think they are going to have to come back to really telling the story to define this new category. It's going to end up taking a lot of PR and a very different set of work to make the world kind of conditioned that like always being available on your watch or on your phone or on your faces is a great thing. But I think Kickstarter has proven to be just such an amazing channel to try to get that influence, because not only do you get this kind of ability to get your story out there, but you get, you know, thousands, tens of thousands, maybe more early customers who want your product so badly they're willing to pay for it before you've even made it. So I'm kind of, everybody that we meet right now comes to us with their Kickstarter strategy along with everything else they're thinking about doing around hardware.
So it's not just about Kickstarting to get money, but it's actually to get an inherent built-in user base.
That's right. Whether it's, you know, we've seen people kickstarting it to get a developer platform. A company like SmartThings did an amazing job to say, hey, come and buy the developer kit, and then you'll be, you know, an early user of it. Or Pebble, which, you know, raised, what was it, like 10 million, you know, millions and millions of dollars, I think, through Kickstarter to get everybody who wanted the watch. Some were developers who wanted to build the apps. Others were just people who wanted in early. And Kickstarter says it's not a store, which it isn't, but it still is this way to say, if you really like buying the first of everything and being right there, you know, and so it's a really different model to actually get customers before you have to go spend a lot of money to get them.
Now, Christian, with Scout, did you have a specific launch strategy on getting your app into the right hands? And can you tell us a little bit about Scout, just in case people don't really know?
Right, so I guess we were unemployable, so we had no other choice but to keep pushing. So for us, it was a really long road to just keep going, and we launched a mobile social network before Facebook had a mobile strategy, and we were part of the whole thing when Apple launched the iPhone, and there was actually no app ecosystem for the first year. It was just a beautiful device with a web browser, and you could call on it, and it was YouTube. But that value proposition was so incredibly much stronger than my old Motorola phone or whatever I had. So that was an instant hit. I think that's with wearables today. It's all alpha testing, and it's not really clear. If I put on a pair of glasses, like, okay, how does this really change my life? But with iPhone, it was like, wow. Just that they had a touchscreen and it was beautiful, tons of colors. It was such a jump. So for us, we built the largest people discovery network, which is, you know, pretty broad. We started out as a dating and flirting app, and then we migrated into a more broad spectrum of meet people nearby and meet people all over the world. And for us, it's really been all about the product. That, you know, we just keep iterating the product over and over and over again, and that's been the way we've been growing. So we never had that, you know, perfect products out the door, bang, and it blew up. It was really a slow grinding in like 3 years until we got anything. Like getting the first 10,000 daily active users was really hard. So.
Yeah, I think there's two good insights in what you were just talking about. And the first one is that for people to want a device and really crave it and talk to their friends about it, there has to be some function that's not just an incremental improvement on something that came before, but an exponentially different experience, and something that really changes the game. And I think right now, especially with the watches, I was kind of disappointed to see in the launch and initial discussions of some of the new devices like the Samsung Gear that it was a lot about just making things you already did easier. And I didn't think that was a compelling enough argument for mainstream adoption. So I think when companies are looking to get into the wearable space, your device is probably going to do lots of great things, but I think highlighting and specifically focusing on what is it that isn't just a little better than pulling out your smartphone and doing it, but something that's really fascinating and special about what your device does, like that's going to be a much better strategy for getting mainstream market adoption. But then you were talking about that the product is really the key, and I think that that's going to be true for this as well. Like all the buzz and the PR and everything you can do around your launch, it's not going to matter if the device isn't great. But at the same time, you can amplify the greatness of your product with great PR. So maybe Julie, you could tell us a little bit about what were some of the PR wins or the PR strategies that helped Groupon and Waze get off the ground, and what are the insights from those that you would give to hardware hackers and wearable computing developers?
So I actually think that Twitter is amazing for stuff like this because the wall is taken down between you and influencers. And influencers could be celebrities or it could just be people in the industry that are respected in fashion or tech or whatever it is. So with Waze, I look at Twitter every day to see what people are saying about our company, and we noticed that Tony Hawk was tweeting about us and Christina Applegate was talking about us. That's free, that perception is free. And then to reach out to People Magazine or Us Weekly and note that these celebrities are using this product automatically is the best PR we could have possibly gotten, and it cost me 0 cents. Did
you guys like retweet those messages?
We retweet them, yeah, through the corporate handle, and then looking up who at those magazines might be interested. Again, a simple Twitter search or Google search, you can track down those people really easily. And I think that a lot of times companies are so eager to pay for a PR person or buy an agency when you don't really have to do that. Your money might be better spent. For example, let's say you had a fitness band on your wrist. You could maybe find better influencers by going to a huge company in your city. Let's say Coca-Cola's headquarters in your city, and you know that they really care about employee fitness. Why not go there and say, we're going to give you 3,000 of these. They might work, they might not, but we want you to try it and encourage your employees to tweet about it, and let's see if we can make them healthier in the next 30 days. It's the idea of trying to get products out into a large amount of people and then measuring it and seeing how it's going. The other thing that we did with Groupon was, again, taking advantage of what the strengths of our product were. Groupon touched everything from discounts to florists, to restaurants, to dental offices. And so we found this guy online who was willing to live off of Groupons for a year. It cost no money, and as long as he didn't touch cash, he would win $100,000 at the end of the year. So we made him quit his job, he put all of his stuff in storage, we made him break up with his girlfriend, he turned in his wallet, and all he had at the end of the day was this paper suit made out of Groupons and an iPhone that I gave him that he was able to buy more Groupons with. So it was this perpetuous cycle. But the news press around that was insane, and it was a little ridiculous of a situation, but we just took what the product's strengths were and then put it out there in a way we thought people would think was interesting.
Josh, do you have any PR insights or ways that, do you think small startups should be looking to invest their money in getting a PR firm? Should they bring someone in-house to handle marketing and press, or should they just be trying to do things really organically as free as possible?
That's a great question. Look, at the beginning, I always tell every startup, I look for what is the story that if I'm sitting down with a friend over lunch, in 10 or 20 seconds, I can tell him about your company that makes it so compelling that he's going to want to sign up for it too. One of the companies I work with is called Nextdoor, and what we like to say is, wherever you live in your neighborhood, if there's crime, if there's something urgent that you want to get out to your neighbors, you actually want to be on Nextdoor, so you actually have a way to communicate with your neighbors who you otherwise don't know or have any access to. And usually most people that I talk to about that will go, oh man, I'll go check if it's in my neighborhood and we'll go sign up. So you really need to find that hook. And once you have that hook, then I think you want to, I recommend to a lot of startups that doing their own PR is great and all, and they should develop their own voice and talk to the community and the world through like a blog. But hiring a PR firm is one of the best strategic things you can actually do with your marketing dollars. It's often much better than spending a lot of money on paid ads, because they can help you craft your story. And if you can't craft your story and get people to talk about you in organic ways, and really get that little like very short snippet out to the rest of the world, you're not really going to be able to start planting all the seeds that you hope will be organic growth. If all you end up doing is paying and buying users and trying to grow some inorganic ways, it won't be nearly as successful. So I think PR is one of the cheapest forms of marketing if you end up being good at that, but only if you have a story that you truly think, if I'm, again, sitting there with a friend at lunch and going, have you seen this new thing? It's really cool, that you can actually communicate it in a way that gets them excited enough to try it.
And I think that actually brings up a good point, which is knowing what the conversation is in your space. If everyone is talking about how this one fitness product is amazing, and you know that yours can compete, but it has this one extra feature, that's a great time for you to play up that extra feature. But you'll only know that if you're really reading these Google alerts every single day, and you're checking out the blogs, and you're understanding what people are saying about your competitors and about your space.
Yep. You really do need to have that hook, that one extra thing about your product that every time the story gets told, they remember that. If you guys remember, like Lyft, the pink mustache and the fist bump when you get in, every time somebody talks about Uber, you might talk about the town car. When you talk about Lyft, you talk about that extra little thing that just makes it super easy to remember, and that gets you hooked. And whether or not you think the pink mustache is like hideous or awesome, it's definitely worth the conversation every time.
So what about when PR goes wrong? What are some of the big mistakes that you guys have seen? Scout, I know with Scout you guys had some troubles. Can you tell us a little bit about sort of your big crisis and how you handled it?
Right. So I think the biggest. So first of all, PR as user acquisition tool never worked for us, and we're signing up 1.5 million users every month, and we've been on Good Morning America, right? And it's like, wow, and lots of preparations, and call mommy, say, we're going to be in Good Morning America, 25 million viewers, and we get maybe 5,000 signups. And so, like, as a user acquisition tool, that instant bump you don't get, but if you have it, if you're part of the conversation long term, then I think it's really good for you. And so, PR for us, we look at as, we want to get the word out, the vision of what we're doing. So we need a platform for that. It's also great for, depending where you are in your stage of your company. If you're fundraising, then it can be good to start drumming up some PR and get the excitement going internally, right? And externally for hiring and keeping your employees motivated. It's pretty cool to be on TechCrunch, like they'll share it with their friends on Facebook and so forth. But as user acquisition strategy never worked for us. As far as crisis PR, I think, you need to get really awesome crisis PR firm. Don't try and do it on your own. And B, you have to be very transparent and lean into the problem. So if you have a crisis in your company, a terrible thing to do is sort of ignore it or be dismissive. It's like, well, the world is an ugly place. We're a reflection of the world, so we can't really deal with it. That doesn't fly well. So I think you want to come out really hard and very transparent with whatever issue you had. So we had issues with minors being abused in our network. And we went to New York Times and said, hey, we want to break this news with you. There's some stuff going on. We want to educate your users, and readers. Ended up being 700 articles in the world. I think it ended up on the first page of New York Times. But we were able to control the message to some extent, and we were able to help them discover it instead of being discovered. You don't want people scooping you. So if you have bad stuff happening in your network or in your company, it's better to be transparent and open. It's sort of the anti-feeling, like it's like, oh, I really want to jump off the bridge, but you should really lean in, and for that you need an awesome, strong team around you to help you through the process.
So if somebody breaks their wrist because they were wearing your, your wristband, you probably want to be forthcoming about that before it becomes the huge crisis story that you have no control over.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing is the phrase, I'm sorry. I mean, companies never say that. It's always, it's unfortunate that this happened to you, and that's usually, legalese that someone will throw at you. But if you really push on those lawyers at your company, you can get to say, I'm sorry, and sometimes that's all somebody wants. That actually saved us in a lot of situations with Groupon where, you may have had a merchant that you had made, then they stole from your house. It doesn't happen very often at all, but it does happen, and so sometimes somebody just wants a quick apology and they want to know what 3 steps you're going to take to fix it. And that tends to be enough. You know, people aren't complaining to start more problems with you. They just want the initial problem taken care of.
So do you guys have any ideas of big app areas that you think are going to blow up for wearable computing? Because as we said at the beginning, I think it's really going to be killer apps that make these devices really special, like, and really take off. Because as cool as a piece of hardware is, if it doesn't do anything, or if there's nothing built on top of it, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think RealTime Health will be super cool. You know, and when I have an app that can actually recommend me, it's like, Christian, you haven't had your glass of wine today, you should actually take it because it will extend your life by 1 day, or what have you. You didn't eat your vitamins, or you didn't get your pulse rate up enough today. Like,
how many days of my life do I get back for like 5 shots of Jameson?
My doctor told me you need to drink 14 drinks a week, so he didn't say how big they should be.
You need to hang out.
No, you know, stuff like that is important, right? How can I get real-time feedback and almost a trajectory is like, hey, you go out exercise 1 hour every day, you know, when you're 60, you're going to be really strong and it's going to be good for you. So I think real-time health and health monitoring is super cool.
Actually, I think that's really a big area that I haven't seen working just right. So like I have a Nike Fuel Band and I wear it sometimes, but if I don't exercise and it's like 6 p.m., it doesn't do anything. It doesn't like remind me to go for a run.
Yeah,
and there's, you know, there's obviously a line to walk between being annoying and really activating the great thing that your device can do. And I think every company has to find that balance for themselves, but that's going to be critical is, you know, it's not just about saying, oh, you know, open it like your smartphone and look at it all the time. You know, but instead, you know, if it's on your body, how can you make use of that by making it unobtrusive yet provide you with more information?
I think it's been a real struggle in the health space. I think most of these devices, and I've tried a couple of these, the Fuel Band and the Up and everything else, and they feel it's like really cool the first week or two. You have all this data about yourself and about your life and your behavior that you never had before. You're like, oh my gosh, I just kind of walked to the, you know, to go get jelly beans and back, and I was sitting at my desk all day, and like that was all I did, and I really didn't walk very much. I had no idea how little I walked. Oh great, like I'll start walking around the office when I'm on the phone or something, and all of a sudden you see you're doing more, but a month later, 2 months later, it feels like a nag. It's like, oh great, I did my 2,000 steps or my 3,000 steps or my 10,000 steps, and you don't quite keep getting this kind of continual growing with you behavior change. So I think we're going to see a lot of this stuff move away from sort of being these like just counters and sensors to either like prompting behavior change. When I go sit down for dinner, it's like, hey, you've had a good day. You know, you might check in with it and you'll be like, hey, you know, what should I have? It's like, hey, you've had a pretty busy day. You know, if you're hungry and at this restaurant, a lot of people like you choose to eat this, and it'll really help you start to make that kind of behavior change instead of just these very, very simple counters. Because I think we don't want to be nagged more in our lives, but we do want to get better and get on program. So, you know, but I think these apps, like the big, as Josh asked, like the big areas is going to be what happens when we have all this data. Not just we have the data, here's a number, but when we're starting to gather data on our behavior, our walking, our breathing, our sleep, like what are the big, great applications that can make you behave differently? And the guys who figure that out and start to build networks around those are going to be the big companies, I think, that really come out of the space in health.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that another big area in hardware computing and wearable computing is these platforms for the apps. But I think sometimes there's a big disconnect between putting a platform out there and giving it to users and actually connecting them with the apps. And I think that if you, just because you have an API and you have a device, the job isn't done. Like, you need to really focus on discovery. And we're seeing that that's still a huge problem for even the biggest platforms. You know, all the app stores are totally clogged and it's really tough to find good stuff. And you know, with Facebook, it's like they're actually making money off of it now because, you know, it's so hard to find good Android or iOS apps because there's so many apps in the stores that they're selling a ton of ads for these apps and app install ads to help people and help developers rise above the crowd. And I think that that's not only is discovery a critical thing to getting your device used, because if people don't have great apps, they're not going to keep using your device, they're not going to recommend it to their friends, but it's also a monetization avenue for some of these devices as well, is to say, you know, I made this device and I have this app store, but you know, you can pay me to promote your app. So I think a lot of devices that are looking for how are we going to recoup our costs while still keeping the devices affordable, I think that that's a cool way that they might be able to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you know, beyond that, I want to talk a little bit about how do we make people feel comfortable with wearable computing devices. So do any of you guys get sketched out when you're talking with somebody who has Google Glass or a wearable computing device on and you're not sure if it's recording you or not?
I do.
Is that like a yes? Right? And people will always tell me like, oh, you can see the screen is on through the prism, and I'm like, no, that's not nearly enough. It's very different. Honestly, it's like you can tell when someone's using their phone and they're like looking at it, and then when they like hold it up, there's like that little angle change, which is like that person's taking a photo. But there's nothing like that that exists with Google Glass, or with especially with face-worn wearable computing devices. Do you guys think that that's okay? Is it all right that there's no way of telling that you're being recorded? And what do you think that means for sort of mainstream adoption of these devices?
It'd be nice if there were a little LED that said, recording. But I think there's two things, right? One is, am I being recorded? Which, I could have my iPhone recording us now. Like that could happen, right? But I think the other thing is also the distraction, right? So I don't know if you guys do the same thing, but whenever I have dinner now with my friends, you have to put your phone on the table, and whoever touches his or her phone the first pays the bill. Because we're so distracted. I have 2 kids. Same thing there. There's nothing on earth that can compete with an iPad. There's nothing, Lego or anything. So that distraction is also highly annoying. And I think if you have easy access and you can sort of use it without people knowing you, especially me, I can't do 2 things at once. Like I'll zoom out into whatever, and I'm getting pinged all the time. That's another issue, right? How can we make the relevant signals come to me? Not everything. Right now I'm getting tweets, emails, SMS, everything. And I'm, I guess, compulsive obsessive, so I have to check all the time. So that distractiveness that we get from technology is also, I think, starting to, at least with my friends, starting to be like, ooh, put away your phone, dude. We're having a good dinner here. So I think privacy, and also, how do we manage this without becoming too too zoned into the technology.
We're already seeing some bars in San Francisco with little like no glass signs.
Yeah.
People are really serious about it. There's some people that just don't want that to be part of their retail experience or their dining experience that they provide at their store. Do you think that it's okay for people to ban things like that?
I mean, I think it's normal and expected. I think in the early days of Facebook, you'd all get drunk at a party in college, and there were pictures of everything that happened the next day, and that was amazing. And we had this pipe to like share and talk about these photos and remember, these memories, and laugh at each other that we never had before. 3-4 years later, everybody's mom is on Facebook, and all of a sudden, like, an entirely new set of rules had to get learned for like what you can share and what you can't. And I think, but the good of what Facebook has allowed us to connect and share around is still like overwhelms all the negative from a lot of that stuff. And I think it actually changed how people behave. And I think with Google Glass and whatever we end up with cameras on our faces or whatever, I think we're just going to end up with a new set of rules that we'll all understand. Look, when I'm playing with my little girl and I can like take a quick picture, I've used Glass a little bit around the house, like the pictures and the quality that I get are so much better than when I'm like, hold on, hold that pose, pull it out of my pocket, open up the camera and take it. And so like there truly is something amazing to be able to capture everything that I think will make up for the creepiness and the other privacy factor, and people will just learn to look away or kind of, not make eye contact with the creepers who do wear these things. But we're going to have to learn as a society, and it's going to be very different than what we think today.
I think we're the ones who are going to be the one making these rules.
We are.
It's like the people in this room specifically, like the people at this conference are going to play a huge part in defining the norms that go along with wearable computing. And so I hope to see the people rally around something I've been playing around in my head. It's like a wearable computing bill of rights. A set of standards that hardware manufacturers need to abide by for people to want to buy their devices, which specifically stem around things like having some kind of signal that says that they're recording people, because my belief is that if we don't have that signal, everyone's going to think they're being recorded all the time. Everyone's going to feel uncomfortable being around people wearing these devices. They're going to project that awkwardness and that uncomfortability to the people wearing those devices, and they're not going to want to wear them anymore. And it's actually like a real danger for the long term of the industry, in my opinion. And I'm not saying that we need to like stop progress. Like I'm as far from that as possible. Like I want the future too. But I think if we don't think about these things cautiously and take action in support of sustainable norms for these devices, we're going to end up running the industry into the ground.
Well, I think it's a huge opportunity. It's a marketing play, right? Like whoever can get their product out there and address the paranoia and address, the flexibility of their product and why it's not creepy, I think they'll win automatically, just because people will rally around that.
Yeah, and it will change behavior, right? I mean, it's funny. Not too many years ago, people thought you were absolutely nuts if you put your picture on the internet. What? You uploaded your picture? You're crazy. What if someone sees you? And now we're recorded all the time, right? So, you know, there are countries, for instance, where the police force is so corrupt that the drivers, they have webcams that takes photos to fight corruption, right? So that they don't get a fake fine and stuff like that. So it will change. You know, there was this French psychology experiment, the Panopticon, this French prison that was a circle, and the prisoners could not see out, but the prison guard could see in. There was one guard in the middle, just spinning around. So every prisoner thought they were being watched all the time. So they, you know, it led to some psychotic changes that wasn't good either. But like, we're always watched, and that's just the way it's going to be moving forward, right? Everything you do could end up online. I mean, it probably will. So that will change behavior, right? It's for most of us, I guess.
Cool, so I want to switch it out to the crowd and see if you guys have any specific questions about bringing a new product to market, marketing, PR, that you want answered by some experts in the field, and see if we can help you guys out directly. So anyone have any questions? Over here, I'm going to repeat the questions so the live stream can hear them too.
You guys think there's going to be eyeglass soon?
Do the panelists think there's going to be eyeglass or an Apple facial computing device?
Seems pretty reasonable.
I think Apple has been amazing at waiting to bring a product to market until they think the consumer demand is really there for it. They were a little bit late to music players, and they figured out how to do it differently, and the iPod took off. They were a little bit, you know, later to trying to figure out smartphones until they had the product just right. I'm guessing we're going to see the same thing for any watch or any glasses product that they would ever make. But I think, like, to me, the biggest signal coming out of Apple, if you guys have paid attention to the new iPhone 5S, is what they call the M7 chip, which is this like hardware chip that sits in the new phone that actually is great, like accelerometer, does all the motion counting, can figure out like, you know, how fast you're moving and all this stuff. And it looks like the perfect thing that you would want to drop into a watch or a Nike Fuel Band type device. I think they just announced that they hired the designer from Nike who's doing the Fuel Band. So I think Apple is definitely going to be, we're going to see them, you know, as soon as they think the market's ready for these things to mainstream, we'll see them come out with some stuff.
But maybe this is the opportunity that developers have to really get in there before Apple sees it. You know, maybe it waits too late this time and somebody really comes out with a killer device. I mean, people weren't that far off when the iPod came around, and it was just a matter of taking the lessons that Apple had already learned in making computers and laptops and saying, hey, people want fashionable devices. And I think we're really seeing Google getting very serious about this right now. They're hiring fashion designers, they're courting the fashion world as much as possible. The new versions of Glass are more like clip-ons that can be added to existing pairs of glasses that blend in a lot better, and it doesn't look like you're really wearing anything. And I think that there's definitely potential for savvy developers to take the lessons that Apple's learned and use them against them before it enters the market. Anybody else?
Do you guys think that the way PR will focus around getting apps and content people on wearables will be like vastly different than the way it is now on mobile? Or should it be different? Or how will the marketplace work for getting apps and content people on wearable that might be different from what we have on mobile? Or should there be some innovation around that? Or I don't know.
Do the panelists think that PR and marketing around getting people to download apps is going to be significantly different on wearable computing versus mobile and past platforms?
Well, I think there's a challenge in doing PR for apps, period, because a lot of them don't have URLs. They don't really have a website that shows how it works or that you can engage with. You'll notice that with Waze, for example, pretty much most of our activity for the consumer is embedded in your phone, whereas if you want to edit the map, you then go online. So that's a challenge I haven't seen many people do well. And I think that that's where, you know, paying for a PR firm, getting injected into a conversation is going to be really important because it's taking the app out of the app store and into everyday life. And I think people are also starting to think about apps as something you buy, just like you would buy an accessory, like a purse or a watch. And so getting more into consumer publications like, you know, I don't know, Cosmo for women or, you know, GQ for guys, you're going to see that happen more and more because it's just a part of the general conversation.
I also think that when you hear about a new product, I've done this survey, and it's obviously a very biased set in the Valley, but 9 out of 10 people that I tell about a new product immediately pull up their phone, go to the App Store, and type in the name of the new product versus going to Safari to try to type it in as a URL. So we've actually gotten to a world where we've trained a lot of people to even just go to an App Store. As we get into wearables, you're gonna probably still have to go to like your phone or a computer to go download or get the actual content to get it to pipe over to your wearable. So I think there's gonna be an extra leap there that we're gonna have to train everybody on. I think figuring out how to do that as simple as possible is gonna be a real challenge, because if I'm like, hey, go get this new thing for your glasses device, you'll be like, okay, I gotta go pull out my phone, I gotta like download it here, I gotta like push 3 buttons to like cause my device to go get it. And that's going to slow everything down. I mean, I found syncing the devices at the end of the day is such a pain still.
Oh, I just had this terrible vision that QR codes are going to come back. But I think there's got to be ways that this is going to be a little bit different. And I think one thing is that right now the hardware is so decentralized. Like everything's not just necessarily running Android or iOS in the platform. It's not as confined on the platforms. And so people are going to be able to have the opportunity to make their own app stores even to some degree. And so with that, I think is going to come a lot of a very different system. Instead of it being a setup where there's just a few app stores and the only real way to get discovered is by being on the charts, I think we're going to see something very different around a distributed app store model. Back there?
You talked a little bit earlier about pay-per-click not really working right now, but what do you think about pay-per-gaze? Because I think that would be the perfect model for glass.
Can you elaborate a little bit on what you mean?
Pay-per-gaze, gazing through your glass and ads are being fed and you react towards your gazing towards whatever you fed to the person or whatever you're wearing. I think that's one of the business model. Maybe
It would be awesome if we could play Grand Theft Auto in real life, right? So I would love that. I'll buy a device, name the price. So that's sort of like, for me, wearables, it gets really cool when it can project over my entire spectrum. And I don't want it to just be a little screen, and that's a promise of the future, of course, but it gets really cool when it can project the guy next to you there, Josh. And only I experience him. So
A little creepy, but
I think one thing that's really fascinating is there was discussed a little bit earlier in the day in some of the other panels was, if the hardware developers don't actually make a conscious move to affect what kind of apps get built, sometimes the platform can go in a complete different direction than you'd expect. With Facebook, for instance, Mark Zuckerberg has said multiple times that when they built the platform, they were imagining all these utility apps, and what ended up happening is that games were just easier to grow, easier to monetize, and therefore just took off and totally dominated the platform. And it's only been over the last few years with the Open Graph that we've seen utility apps sort of come back into the mainstream and really get more love from developers. And so I think that that's going to be a big deal. Like if these hardware makers just leave it up to the market to decide what they want to build, they might not get the best platform out there. It's going to take a little bit of hand-holding in the right direction.
Well, I think we haven't done that much talking on this panel about augmented reality and sort of what that'll end up meaning for wearables, I think, given the gentleman's question. But I think I don't think we're going to start with a model that's going to be advertising and pay-per-gaze, because I think people will be very resistant to that. But I think as we start to figure out what are the behaviors when you have good augmented reality, when you're able to look around, you're able to go, oh my gosh, that's this restaurant, and there's all this extra context, and I can pull up the menu. Or, oh, I look down this street, and I start to get to see what all the businesses are labeled. There'll be a lot of room for advertising in a behavioral way to really start to work in. I think Waze is a perfect example of what this could start to mean, where you're driving on a route, and it's like, hey, do you need coffee? There's like cheap coffee if you just go 2 minutes out of your way. And that's like this advertising that would by default, if you're like, hey, I'm going to build you a map, and I'm going to keep annoying you with a different destination with ads and offers all around you, you'd feel like it's annoying. But once you start using Waze, you get so addicted to the traffic data and the rerouting and everything else that you're like, oh wait, it's actually being my assistant all the time to help me. And you start to feel more comfortable when it introduces advertising. I think we just have a ways to go for these devices to actually be useful for us before ad models or anything else will make even a little bit of sense.
We definitely have a ways to go.
A ways to go, that was it.
Yeah, but I wouldn't expect anything from the traditional world of desktop advertising to really make its way into this world. Like, it's going to be special native ad formats, the same way that mobile apps are realizing that you can't use a third of the screen and just stick a banner ad. It doesn't work. People won't click it. People will get really offended by that. So I think we're going to see really new native sponsored notifications is the thing that I think we're really going to get to be talking about. Back here?
Well, so the advertising, so the banners pop up when you're stopped, when the car is stopped. So they're intended to. So we'll check it out. If that hasn't been your experience, I'd love to talk to you after this. But we do everything we can to promote safety. Any of our advertising only pops up if you're stopped at a stoplight or and the car's not in motion. You'll see a banner at the top. And we do our best to make sure that these serve your experience that you're already having. So if we know that you're going to work in the morning, it makes sense to get a Starbucks deal because you probably want coffee on the way to get you through the day. As far as anything else on the map that you see, you may see pins that, again, are additive to your experience because we know your intent. We know where you're going. We may help you save 10 cents on gas. But forefront of...
Hey, all right, we're just going to move on to the next question. No, that's all right. We're going to move on to another question, I think, because we want to stick it around wearable computing. But actually, so to look back on what we've learned today, I think we've really established that the sexiness and coolness of wearable computing is not where it needs to be. And in order to get that into a better place, I think hardware developers and software developers are going to have to do their best to seed their devices and their software to influencers and people that can help them with that. That might mean going through free channels like Twitter or hiring a PR firm, because as Josh says, it can be a very efficient use of marketing spend. In the long term, be as forthcoming and find the story about your device that you can sell and that makes you unique. Focus on something that's really truly different than what you could do on a smartphone, not just incrementally easier. And in the long term, it looks like we're really going to need something like a bill of rights for wearable computing to help people feel comfortable with the devices. And that if we get all these things together, it's obvious that wearable computing is the future, but it's going to be us who make it happen. So I'm excited to see what all of you guys do out there over the next few years with wearable computing. Thanks so much for coming.